The framing requires the same honest examination that several similar titles in this collection have required. The do this framing implies a technique, a specific, deployable, correctly applied action that produces the apology as a reliable output. And the "it actually works" addendum implies that previous approaches failed, not because the approach to the problem was fundamentally misconceived, but because the specific techniques were wrong, that the right technique exists, that the apology is producible through the correct application of it. This framing is wrong in the way that matters most. Not wrong about whether avoidants apologize. They do in the specific cases where the internal conditions that make genuine apology possible have been met. Not wrong about whether there are qualities and behaviors that make the apology more or less likely. There are, and they are worth examining. Wrong about the mechanism, about what the doing produces and why. The apology is not produced by a technique applied to the avoidant. It is produced by the avoidant's own internal conditions, meeting a specific quality of external circumstance. And the specific quality of external circumstance that most consistently creates the conditions for genuine apology is not a strategy directed at the avoidant's psychology. It is the genuine, internally developed, self-directed quality of someone who has arrived at a particular place within themselves, a place that exists independently of the apology, that does not require the apology to be real, and that paradoxically, by not requiring the apology, creates the conditions under which the apology becomes most possible. This is the irony at the center of every piece in this collection that touches on what the avoidant responds to and why. The thing that produces the desired response is never the thing organized around producing the desired response. It is always the genuine thing, the quality, the state, the interior condition that exists independently of the desired response, and that, by existing independently, removes the management system's most powerful reason to prevent the response from occurring. What creates the internal conditions for the avoidant's genuine apology is not your expression of the hurt, not the direct communication of what was done and what it cost, not the patient, generous, entirely honest attempt to help the avoidant understand the impact of their behavior. All of these have their place. All of these, in the right context, can be part of the conversation in which an apology eventually becomes possible. But none of them, on their own, produce the specific internal conditions that the avoidant's genuine apology requires. The internal conditions that the apology requires are the conditions in which the avoidance management system is not running its standard protocol against the information about the harm, in which the information about the harm can reach the interior rather than being intercepted by the management and processed within the frameworks that make the harm manageable rather than fully felt, in which the honest accounting of what was done and what it cost is not competing with the management's continuous function for the avoidant's available interior attention. The management's standard protocol against information about harm is the protocol examined across these pieces in various forms. The deflection, the minimizing, the reframing of the harm into something smaller, the redirection of the conversation from the harm's content toward the avoidance experience of the conversation about the harm, the various sophisticated mechanisms by which the management converts genuine accountability into something the self-concept can absorb without requiring the full identity-level reckoning that genuine accountability demands. These mechanisms run most powerfully when the person expressing the harm is expressing it with the emotional charge of someone who is hurt. Not because the emotional expression of hurt is wrong, it is genuine and legitimate and entirely understandable, but because the emotional charge gives the management system exactly the input it was designed to process. The management protocol was built to manage against emotional intensity directed at the avoidant. The emotional intensity triggers the protocol. The protocol runs. The deflection, the minimizing, the reframing arrive as the management's outputs, and the genuine apology, which requires the interior to be reached rather than the management to be activated, does not occur. The specific thing that creates the conditions for the genuine apology is the absence of the emotional charge without the absence of the content. Not the suppression of the hurt, not the performed composure of someone who is managing their expression in the strategic hope of producing a different response. The genuine, internally developed, arrived at through actual processing quality of someone who has fully felt the hurt, has not bypassed it or diminished it or performed their way past it, and who is now able to communicate its content from a place of sufficient internal settledness that the communication does not carry the emotional charge that activates the management protocol. This quality is not achieved through decision. It is achieved through the specific, time-requiring, internally demanding work of actually processing the hurt, actually feeling it in the private, unwitnessed, no longer requires an audience quality of genuine emotional processing until the processing produces the specific internal settledness that distinguishes the fully processed from the managed around. When the processing is genuine and the settledness is real, the communication of the harm's content changes quality. It arrives not as the emotional expression of someone who is currently in the hurt, which the management processes as intimacy pressure and manages against, but as the factual, specific, calm account of someone who has been in the hurt, has processed it fully, and is now reporting on it from the specific, composed, not requiring the avoidance, response to maintain itself, place of genuine processing's completion. This communication, factual, specific, calm, not requiring a particular response, does not provide the management system with the inputs it was designed to manage against. The emotional charge that activates the deflection and the minimizing and the reframing is absent. What remains is the content, and the content without the emotional charge that the management was managing against reaches the interior rather than the management. The interior that receives the content of the harm without the management's interception produces a different response than the management's interception produces. Because the interior, the genuine, unmanaged, this is actually what I feel place in the avoidant that exists beneath the management's authority, has its own relationship with the information about harm. Its own response to the specific knowledge that something done by the avoidant caused a specific, genuine, clearly described impact on a person the avoidant genuinely cares for. The interior's response is not the management's response. The management's response is the deflection, the minimizing, the self-protective reframing. The interior's response when the interior actually receives the information rather than the management intercepting and processing it is something closer to what the information calls for, the recognition of the harm, the genuine, personal, identity-engaging acknowledgement that something was done that should not have been done, and that its doing produced a cost that the honest accounting of the self's behavior cannot comfortably accommodate. This acknowledgement is the beginning of the apology, not the full, complete, genuine apology in its ideal form. The interior's initial acknowledgement is often tentative, incomplete, still partially shaped by the management's influence even as it occurs, but the beginning. The specific, genuine, reaching toward accountability quality of someone whose interior has received the information about the harm and is producing the honest response to it, rather than the management's self-protective response. The apology that follows this acknowledgement is not guaranteed to be immediate, is not guaranteed to be perfectly expressed, is not guaranteed to arrive in the specific form that the harm's weight would ideally produce. But it is genuine. It is coming from the interior rather than from the management's calculation of what output most efficiently restores the comfortable dynamic. It is the avoidant's actual self, reached by the actual content of the harm, producing the actual response that the actual self has when it is genuinely confronted with the honest accounting of what was done. What does this mean in practice? Not as a strategy, as the honest, self-directed, genuinely serving you description of the internal work that makes this quality of communication possible. It means doing the processing first, before the conversation about the harm, before the communication of what was done and what it cost, doing the actual, private, no audience required, fully felt work of processing the hurt until the processing is genuine rather than managed, until the settledness is real rather than performed, until the communication of the harm's content can come from the place of someone who has been in the hurt and is no longer actively in it, who can speak about it with the composed, factual, not requiring the avoidance response quality that the unactivated interior can actually receive. This processing is not quick, is not linear, is not the result of deciding to be composed and then being composed. It is the result of genuinely feeling the hurt, in the private, honest, taking however long it takes quality of real emotional processing, until the feeling has been fully honored and the processing has produced the specific settledness that is its natural result. The settledness is not indifference to what was done. The harm remains the harm. The cost remains the cost. The specific, personal, this is what happened and this is what it produced content remains entirely real and entirely legitimate. What changes is not the content, but the relationship to the content. The ability to hold it clearly, to communicate it directly, to bring it into the shared space between you and the avoidant without the emotional charge that the management protocol was built to intercept. The second practical implication is the specificity of the communication, not the general expression of having been hurt, not the categorical statement about the avoidance pattern or character. The specific, the named particular, this specific behavior in this specific situation produced this specific impact account of what happened. The specificity matters for the same reason the settledness matters. The general expression of hurt gives the management system the generalized input that the management's generalized frameworks can accommodate. The specific account of a specific behavior's specific impact does not provide the same accommodation. The specific is concrete. It is the thing itself, named and described and placed in the shared space where both people can see it clearly. The management's reframing mechanism requires generality to operate effectively. Specificity resists the reframing. The specific, calm, fully processed account of a specific harm is the communication that is most likely to reach the avoidance interior, and the interior, reached by this communication, is the most likely source of the genuine apology. The third practical implication is the releasing of the requirement for the apology to come. This is the hardest and the most counterintuitive, and it is also in the specific, ironic, monitoring system bypassing logic that governs what actually reaches the avoidance interior the most important. The genuine apology is most possible when the person who deserves it has genuinely, internally released the requirement for it. Not performed releasing. The monitoring system detects the performance. The genuine releasing that comes from the processing's completion. From the specific, internally arrived at place of someone who has processed the hurt fully enough that their own wholeness is no longer contingent on the avoidance acknowledgement of the harm, who can speak about the harm honestly and specifically and without emotional charge, and who genuinely, not strategically, does not require a particular response to maintain their sense of their own worth. This releasing is not the denial of what was owed. The apology is owed. The harm was real, and the accountability for it is legitimate. The releasing is not the revision of this reality. It is the specific, internal, arrived at through genuine processing quality of someone who has moved past the place where the apology's arrival is required for their healing, whose healing has, through the genuine work of actually processing the hurt, progressed past the point of contingency on the avoidance acknowledgement. When this genuine releasing is present, when the communication of the harm comes from the settled, non-requiring, entirely processed place of someone who is speaking about what happened, because speaking about it is honest, rather than because speaking about it is a bid for the acknowledgement the healing requires. The management system has nothing to manage against. The input is not organized around the avoidance response. The management protocol does not activate. And the interior, receiving the communication directly, produces the response the interior has when it is genuinely, honestly, without the management's interception, confronted with what was actually done. The genuine apology follows, not always, not in every case, not as a guaranteed output of the correctly applied approach, but as the most available output of the specific, internally genuine, management bypassing quality of communication that the genuine processing produces. And if the apology does not come, if the interior, even reached directly, does not produce the acknowledgement, the processing has still served you. The settledness is still real, the wholeness is still present, the healing has still occurred. Not through the apology's arrival, through the genuine work of someone who processed the hurt fully enough that the healing did not require what was owed to finally arrive. The apology would have been the justice. The healing is the life, and the life, fully inhabited, genuinely settled, not contingent on anyone's acknowledgement, was always the more important thing to arrive at.